Good evening. I'd like to welcome you all to the Board of Selectmen meeting, January 25th, 2018. We have a very full and interesting agenda tonight, so without further ado, I'll turn it right over. We have a Water Resources Study Committee update, and Jerry Clark, you're going to be presenting.
Yep.
I wonder if we should turn the lights off so that we could...
That's great.
Oh, that's much better.
Wonderful.
So I've left you copies of handouts that I will refer to, and I'll tell you which one to look at as we go through it.
So you'd like us to go ahead and distribute them?
Certainly, if you wish.
Okay.
The first one actually is going to be who we are. Let me do it this way.
Okay, and I'm sorry,
No, that's fine, that's fine. Then
Thank you.
this is a recitation of the legal basis for water management in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts.
That's great. Thank you.
These 6 pages, it's duplex, are very complex. I don't intend to put them on the screen. I think they'd be not too viewable and might be confusing, but we'll constantly refer to them. This was testimony before the Joint Committee on Housing in December. And lastly, this was the budget narrative that Ms. Canny has already seen.
And they have the hydrology study outline as well.
Thank you. So that covers those bases.
Does everybody have the height?
I do, yeah, thank you. Yes, thanks.
So let me just first say that the committee, which is actually an authorized committee under the Board of Health, with a 2-year or longer mandate, is composed of Justine Van-Kierken, who I'm sure you all know, Carol Chert, who is sitting at the controls, Carol Lisbon in her Patagonia.
No, it's Marmot. I have
Oh, I'm
Patagonia.
sorry. Unfortunately, Justine is out on the West Coast and can't attend. Greg Cahoon, who is an IT specialist, and Ron Myrick, who is an LSP. And some of their CVs are in this document for you. Okay, let's go.
Impressive group.
Well, I'll tell you, when we get to it, I'll mention that it took a long time getting the group formed. All right, so the question really comes down to why should we be concerned about water? And I'll preface it by saying, if you were here in Dover in the 1880s, you would think water was inexhaustible. And that was the impression. By the way, just to make a comment, you've asked me to keep it to somewhere around 10 minutes to leave a question, so please could you hold your comments and questions to the end.
Good.
And in fact, the United States has not really recognized that water is a limitation, except as we see more and more regulation, like in California, and the loss of wells for agriculture, the depletion of the Colorado River, in Nevada and Colorado, where you don't own the water that falls on your roof. There's evidence of this. So one of the problems is this: rising temperature and changes in precipitation, changes in the ability of the precipitation that does fall to get where it needs to go. And we'll have some discussion briefly on that. Anecdotally only, we know that there have been wells that failed. I don't currently have data because data wasn't collected until about 2014 in this town, like almost every other single town. And furthermore, we'll see that the DEP itself doesn't collect the data even though it has regulations requiring it. But what I can tell you is that we think there were about a dozen wells that got lost last year. In this month alone, we've got 2 applications for replacements. This is a very flowing brook in May of 2017, right outside my house. It goes along Pine Street, goes past Karen Stive's place. You can look on Google Maps. You'll see that there are a number of ponds along this way, flowing. It goes underneath Center Street, comes up for a bit on Knollwood, and when I was much younger, there was a huge compensatory storage right by the railroad tracks, right adjacent to the brand new Dover Water Company 3 wells. And for many years now, it's dry as a bone. I won't attempt to, at this moment, describe the reasons for that, even though there is water on Knollwood as it's flowing down to that point. Our biggest problem is this. There are, in fact, 6 public water systems. And I'm going to use the term PWS constantly. That's a DEP-defined term. There are 6 PWSs in Dover. I know we tend to think of only the one big one, but there are 5 others as well. There is a standard that the Clean Water Act, federal level, and therefore the DEP, long ago adopted, which is an intent that we have only 65 gallons per person consumption per day. If you were in the town of Foxborough right now, you would find yourself getting warning letters if you try to use more than that on an annual average. They actually adhere to that. One of the reasons is they're short on water. In our town, every single one of these 6 PWSs, as we'll talk about in that data that I gave you, not only exceed the standard, but for those who have permits, not all of them are large enough to even have permits, all of those exceed what they're allowed to draw, often by more than 100%. Now we're going to talk about what does that mean in terms of water in the town. And lastly, in 2016, the DEP demanded that public water systems impose conservation measures. The largest of the PWSs in Dover, in its own permit, has an extremely long list of steps that it is mandated that it must undertake for conservation. And as we all know, nobody imposed any form of conservation measures in 2016, nor in 2017. Is water a problem only in Dover? Far from it. When we go to the monthly Massachusetts EEA Water Resources Commission meetings, it's amazing how those who represent the users in the form of Department of Environmental Protection, Department of Agriculture, Department of Conservation and Recreation, it's as if they were logically on one side of the room and the MWRA is on the other. And you very quickly realize that the MWRA is essentially in the business of selling water. If you go to their website, you will find, and I want to quote this, I don't want to misstate it. No water use restrictions are required for MWRA fully supplied customers. It's on their website. And of course, in 2016, we knew that, because if you look at the map of the MWRA service area, you'd see that other towns outside that service area, to one degree or another, had water conservation measures at least stated and, like Needham, enforced. But the entire full-service MWRA area around metropolitan Boston, there wasn't a single conservation measure at all. And then, of course, we have the infamous recording on WBUR of Emily Rooney complaining about all this talk about a drought because when she goes into her kitchen and turns on the faucet, there's plenty of water. Yet, we have this interesting problem. This is a period, this is data taken from the MWRA directly. The major reservoir is Quabbin. Quabbin, in theory, is supposed to have 6.5 or more years of capacity if not another drop of rain fell. That's something that goes back to the 30s. when they first started this, and they continue to use that. In fact, what is true is that the consumption level, which is all that they want to nowadays talk about, has dropped from about 300,000 gallons a day to 200,000 gallons a day for a very good reason. We've lost all the industry. And industrial uses were the predominant users of water. Think Lowell, for example. But if you look at availability of water, this is 2008, this is the end of 2017. These are average, annually averages, rather than pinpoints. And I don't think there's any question we can all see a trend line. In terms of capacity, again, this is data taken from the MWRA. So, this is not just a Dover problem, this is a Commonwealth-wide problem if it isn't a USA-wide problem. Okay. Now, why are we here? I'm sure some, if not all of the selectmen, remember that this has been going on for quite some time, this question of what do we do about water. The 46 Springdale Special Town Meeting really brought it to the fore, and you can see that the Open Space Committee said, we're worried, there's a dramatic reduction of stream flows. The Board of Health said, we don't have any data to figure out what's going on. The Conservation Commission said, we are really concerned about the overuse of Dover water resources. And the Board of Selectmen said, okay, we agree, we only have anecdotal information, we don't have real data, but we do know that there are streams drying up, and this is 3 years ago. We don't have data, we don't caption data on private wells, and at the time, no one was capturing data on any of the 6 public water supply systems either. So nobody knew what was going on. So the Board of Selectmen said in 2014, we're going to work with other boards, Health and Concom, to develop and implement an approach to this. Well, here we are 3 years later. In fact, this has been going on since at least 1995, if not before. Now, there's an absolutely critical comment in the Water Study Report in January 1995. It was a statement in a letter from Town Council of that day when asked, do we have the Board of Selectmen, we the town, do we have the ability to address expansion of public water systems? And the Town Council said, well, as long as the amount of water is within that which the DEP says is adequate, you don't have any authority. Unfortunately, at the time, nobody knew that already withdrawals far exceeded the allowable. There are a number of towns and state boards that have expressed these concerns, many of them specifically with regard to Dover. We have a number of studies that were done by the state for Dover, and if anybody's interested, they're all online in our archive. So what the dickens is going on? Was 2016 an aberration? I have some data from MIT that I won't bore you with because it's even more of concern than this one. This is National Weather Service, Norton, Massachusetts. Not the airport, but real Massachusetts, Norton. This is from the early 1933 period all the way up to last year. What do you see? This is the annualized average temperature, the horizontal line. However, looking at the extremes, we're seeing more occurrences of extreme high temperature and a dramatic reduction in the extreme low temperatures. Now, I grant you, we just had the Montreal Express roar through here a couple of weeks ago. And no one's denying that that occurs on occasion. But it doesn't occur as frequently as it used to, nor do these occur as infrequently as they used to. And in point of fact, I've got a study that we have from MIT, Yosef an Israeli who runs the city planning department, where he has documented that when we get precipitation, we're losing 50% or more of it. Why? Because with the elevated temperatures, we're getting more evaporation. As we build out more roads, parking lots, driveways, roofs, more houses, we lose another 25% to runoff. It doesn't percolate into the ground. And of course, I hope all of you saw this article this past week. Last year was the second highest recorded average temperature ever recorded in almost 200 years. And that was without even having an El Nino that would have boosted it. So clearly we have a trend line that cannot be denied. This is raw data. This isn't opinion, no attribution of cause, but it's raw data. So what are we trying to do? Well, first of all, the Board of Health, strangely enough, both at the federal level and the Commonwealth level, is the board that's given the authority and the responsibility to worry about water. Under the Federal Clean Water Act and several other acts, it flows to us. The Commonwealth under 310 CMR says it's us. We have a fiduciary responsibility to worry about this, not just in terms of quality, but also in terms of quantity. What do we have to do? We really need to get out there and identify where there's potable water. What is the availability? What's the capacity to draw on it? And sustainability. We're not interested this year. We're interested over the next couple of decades. One of the things I often hear, Candace saw this when John Thompson and I did a dog and pony show about 2 years ago, which is, I think, what got you interested. And what was stated was that when rain falls on the ground, if you've got a so-called gravel shallow well, which almost nobody has anymore, it still takes about 5 years for that water to find its way to where you're drawing water for your well. But if you've got a deep fractured rock well, a drilled well, we're talking 20 to 50 years. So the water that fell yet last year won't make it to your well for a number of years. So if there was an impact from the drought in 2016, well, it's that headlight down the tracks coming at us. We need to document where well locations are now so that we can understand where we're drawing water from. There are 2 aquifers that the town sits on, not one. Essentially to the south of the town, think driving down Walpole Street and getting to roughly Pinewood. From there south, it's actually in the Neponset, or otherwise known as the Charles River Basin. If you're to the north, you're in the, excuse me, not Charles River, Neponset River. If you're to the north, you're in the Charles River. And we always think we're in the Charles River, but about a third of the town isn't. We need to find out, is there contamination? We really suffered when there was. It took us a while to figure it out, didn't it? What happens if it shows up again? Something else. Fuel truck dumps. We have no means of currently understanding where that will go. We need to understand where the surface groundwaters flow to. It's not as easy as saying, oh, I can see it, because many of them go underground for a while. And a perfect example is Illicit Brook. We need to document what people are using. Remember that 65 gallons per day standard that we're supposed to be adhering to? That some towns require you adhere to? You'll see we don't. We need to think about what's going to happen as the town grows. We need to think what's going to happen as things like rising temperature and changes in precipitation and retention. Even though we are seeing more occurrences of extreme high precipitation, that same NWS report, if I were to pull up a graph which would be looking very complex to you, you'd find out that we're actually getting less precipitation. We're getting faster cycles and the water just disappears. And if you think about it, places like Houston, how much did they benefit from that water that fell? The answer is almost none. It all ran off. We need to develop a data set so that we can recommend what we should be doing in the future. And we need to tell people about this and explain it to them. Now, there is a concern among some people that if you start talking about wells, you're going to impact real estate values. Let me tell you something. If I were in the city of Newton, I'd worry more. I'd worry more because I'm paying $2,200 to $2,500 a year just to have that water. And the MWRA is busy selling it to more and more communities, so you start to wonder, okay, are they going to be there 10 years from now? When is it drought? This is just quick, so you get to understand who we're talking about. It's important to understand what the focus of the DEP is. These are DEP numbers. There's 65% of the Commonwealth, there are 6.8 million residents. There's 65% of the Commonwealth is served either directly or indirectly by the MWRA. There's another 25% who are served by municipal departments or otherwise water districts like Devon Westwood or large regulated commercial water systems like Eversource in Weymouth. That leaves only 10%. And the DEP's attitude is, we need to deal with these people and these people. The 10%, yeah, no, that doesn't matter. That's only 680,000 people, right? The problem is that 680,000 people are people who are served by private wells and by small commercial companies. And by small, I mean they draw less than 150,000 gallons a day, and that's a term of art of the DEP, a specification. So who are we in terms of water users? I think one of the biggest misconceptions is to think that these regulated water companies right here are different from these people. The joke is they're not. It's just that they use bigger wells to draw from the same aquifer, just as if there were a bunch of private users. All of these people, all 6,000 people, all 95% of the people are drawing from the same aquifer. It's the same shared water. The only ones who aren't in here are this 5% who depend on other water systems, Natick and Walpole specifically. And you can look at the graph and get a sense of that. It should be the case that the DEP steps in here and says, hey, wait a second, let's take a look at how much water you're using, how much water you're drawing. Is it drawing more than you should? Are you impacting the aquifer? Are you causing problems in the future? And the problem is, remember the 150,000 gallons a day? The DEP turns out to be one guy, literally. His name is Dwayne Levanchi. He's the only guy who gets a chance to look at the reports, if they're filed. Problem is, he's stated at least twice in WBUR, he can't pay attention to small water companies. He doesn't have the time. Now, locally, we've got another problem. Through an error in the legislature, the Board of Health only has authority from the legislature at the time someone wants to drill a well, or at the time we believe there's contamination. Other than that, we cannot deal legally on these matters. So there's no legal authority to enforce limits that the DEP publishes that we're supposed to be enforcing because we don't have the legal authority to do it at this time. The other issue, of course, is these two numbers. 150,000 gallons a day, Levanchi's department won't even look at the reports that are filed, and they've admitted it. They don't look at it. What's worse is if it's under 100,000 gallons a day, nobody even files, or isn't obligated to file. They don't even have to draw water with a permit. Why is that important to Dover? Can you go back a bit?
Sure.
Old Farm and Springdale Farms are in the under 100,000 gallons a day. So even though they do file the annual permit reports, much of the data is missing because they're not obligated to file anything at all. and nobody looks at them. Okay. So when we talk about the DEP, they're supposedly responsible. We know that he's already admitted he doesn't look. The water conservation measures that are mandated in the permits for those two larger systems, now known as Colonial, now known as Springdale Farms, there are mandatory conservation measures, some of them very detailed and lengthy, right in the permit. We all know nobody is doing anything. Literally. We'll see in a moment that their withdrawals are far in excess of what they're allowed to draw. And we all know that customer base has expanded without any review or analysis of the effect of that expansion, which by definition is going to increase the withdrawals.
Jerry, I don't want to interrupt you, but I have to respect that we have a 7 o'clock, almost a hard stop.
Okay, well, so Levangie said, okay, I will do something if you show me the numbers. The problem is we don't have anything at all. Now, when I talk about numbers, the colorful 6 pages of charts, all you have to do is look at the red numbers. That's all you really have to do. If it's red, they're exceeding either the 65 gallons a day per person, or they're exceeding their allowable withdrawal. The rest of it, you can understand, but that's what to focus on. So I'm going to turn this over to Carol now.
Okay, do you want to,
Oh, okay. Action note. Kate knows that we have submitted a warrant article. We're looking for something in around this level or less of funding. Everything else in this is already funded through the department or is through volunteer action. No additional costs. We want to map the GIS location of wells and septic systems and make it public so you can look at it online. We want to monitor more USGS sites, get them to do more. We testified before the Committee on Housing on one bill. We're going to submit another bill to allow the town to take into consideration the impact of all of this on comprehensive permits on 40B. There's already a Supreme Judicial Court ruling that supports that. So I'll turn this over quickly. Ron's not here, so Carol's going to fill in.
so we are so fortunate to have Ron Murick on the Water Resource Study Committee. He is an environmental engineer at Tetra Tech. This is what he does for work. So he has very graciously prepared a 4-page outline of what we would be looking for our hydrology study committee. The next couple of slides I'll go through really quickly, just give you a general idea of what the hydrology study would do. It would document current demands on water, assess how the demands are affecting the 2 aquifers in town, assess for potential groundwater contamination, and document water flows so that we know in the future if there was contamination, what it might impact. Assess potential impacts of future development, climate change, and other factors, and establish a long-term monitoring program, which is essentially the installation of 20 monitoring wells that we would be able to use for the initial study and then have in perpetuity to monitor in the future. So we could
And we're talking dynamic measurement.
Outcome and benefits of the hydrology study. It would provide a current assessment of our groundwater resources, so we have a base level. It would look at groundwater table elevation, also quality of water and any contamination issues. And then, as I mentioned, it would establish a town-wide well network for ongoing monitoring in the future. It will provide the data that we need because so much of the information that we have is anecdotal, and you really can't do a serious analysis without the data that we would be able to gather.
And we can't get the state's attention without it.
Yeah. So really quickly, this is the last slide. Other things that the Water Resource Study Committee is doing in addition to really promoting the warrant article for the hydrology report. Conservation initiatives, the state of Massachusetts or the Commonwealth has a model water conservation bylaw. And so we're just going to look at that in the context of Dover. Jerry's been doing a lot of public presentations to educate residents on the importance of it. The planning board is beginning to look at alternatives for low-impact development, conservation development, that sort of thing. And so the Water Resource Study Committee would certainly provide information to help with that effort. Elm Bank is a whole other issue.
Yeah, let me just mention that. We always, I think, some of us in the back of our minds feel that Elm Bank is the fallback position, an expensive one, but a fallback position. I'm not sure if everybody understands that there's a four-party agreement and a legislative act in 1986 that granted Dover, Natick, Wellesley, and Needham exclusively the right to water from Elm Bank for their exclusive use of their residents. And Sherborne is now negotiating with Natick to buy that very same water.
So we're also just working to educate ourselves. We've met with the Charles River Watershed Association. We're looking at a lot of model information that Mass Audubon has, and again, conversations and attendance at meetings with Mass DEP and DCR. And
Good.
that is
7 o'clock.
Thank you very much. Very quickly, I appreciate so much the presentation, and of course, I look forward to being able to pour through the documents. I'm sure you do. In just 1 or 2 minutes, do you have any pressing questions, or do you want to take this under advisement? And
I would like to make some comments. So first of all, clearly the Water Committee has taken the charge seriously. They put together a very impressive group of people. This presentation was opened up our minds. You know, personally, I'm concerned about our resources and climate change, and I wholeheartedly agree that without a baseline, you know, we're going to be relying on anecdotal information. So I really thank all of you on the committee for your hard work. It certainly shows what you've been doing, and I look forward to poring over the red numbers.
all right, thank you.
Very well done. Thank you.
Thank you.
Carol, thank you. Carol, thank you. Very well done. Jerry, what do you think in terms of timing?
Between now and July 1, we will have already commenced to look at the hydrology study, and when you look at it carefully, you realize it is the basis for either an RFI or an RFP. And we already know that we do not have to come under the state regulations for issuing an RFP because of what the nature of the work is. So we're not constrained by that. So we intend over the next several months to build a package submittal and to locate those firms we want to talk to who might supply the hydrology study. We obviously can't go forward until July 1 on that, assuming that the town meeting authorizes us to. We've given you a cost estimate, and I can assure you we will live by it, or less. And the outcasts, we've got a phenomenal group of people who are spending a lot of time of their own to get these things done. So between now and July 1, all we can do is really prepare. We are, starting in 2 weeks, going to start testing out our use. We've been developing some software for the Windows tablets that we've acquired so that the agents will go out on their site inspections or whenever they go out to the site, and we'll acquire the GIS location, photographs of the site, data, and we can download it into a database which we intend to make publicly accessible instead of people having to come to the office and dig through paper files to try and find things, often not finding them. So that's what we'll be working on over the next several months. We're also introducing a high-speed scanner with paper correction, image correction, and we are going to attempt to deal with the massive array of different shapes of paper, different qualities of paper, the handwriting and everything, to try and image everything that's in that office, so that we can then try to build a database for analysis, make that public, and of course get the paper out of the office so it's not in the way anymore. As we all know, paper in this building is just expanding like crazy. So those are some of the tasks we hope to get started on and maybe accomplished between now and July 1, but the big nut is we can't really do anything of major accomplishment until after town meeting, if town meeting approves the expenditure for the hydrology study. I hope that answers your question. Hydrology study, we hope will be done within about a year, but I can't promise that.
The one question I might have is that, and we are fortunate enough to have town council here, I hope you would be working closely to be sure in terms of the monitoring and the...
I talked to David about this already, assured him that we will be turning all of the details in terms of the mechanisms over to town council to assure that that's handled.
Good.
Because there are going to be issues like
Private.
public access to private property, for example.
And privacy, and as soon as you start talking about photographs, I start thinking
The
about privacy
photographs
issues.
are internal, but the data is of its own necessity, public data. It's sitting on cards anyway that anyone can go look at.
I understand. Thank you. I really appreciate very much the presentation, and thank you very much. What a tremendous amount of work. Yes?
I would just like to add that for those of us who were able to attend Denise's State Rep Denise Frolick's presentation Monday evening,
Right.
which was great, and urge everybody to watch it on YouTube if you didn't get to it. She mentioned that she's been working with Dover on hydrology, and of course we as committee members have been involved with it for quite some time. She also mentioned that she's been working with Board of Selectmen on hydrology, and if that's the case, I was wondering if you could share with us what those discussions have been.
When she and I had a conversation, she wondered if we were aware of the Water Study Resource Committee, and I said, of course we are. In fact, it was a charge coming from our office, and she said, as a select person, it certainly was imperative to her that she go through all of us. So indeed, that's what she means about sort of the cooperative nature of it.
Again, she has offered to sponsor a bill that we intend to write for her. Senator Ross from Rentham-Natick area has S-748 in the till, but he's not really apparently knocking on doors. And it's not bluntly well written. So we intend to submit a bill that will be very specific, based on the SJC ruling of December 2016, which I have informed you of previously, that will allow a municipality which is not served by a public water system and is not served by a municipal sewage system, and guess who that is, would be allowed to consider in its review of a comprehensive application, Chapter 40B, would be allowed to consider as a factor the impact of a development or any other development on these natural resources.
I understand. It's very nascent at this particular point.
Correct. I
Yeah.
haven't put it to the pen yet.
Right, thank you. Thank you all very much for coming and for the information, and the update for all of us. It's a tremendous amount of work. We appreciate it. Thank you. Moving on. Nina, how are you?
Well, thanks.
Welcome, Nina. Thank you for coming.
Of course.
Great. It's great to have you. We are next going to move to Mr. Orsi about the meadows and snow plowing. I'm not sure if they are all outside.
Bob is.
Okay.
I've seen
All
Bob.
right. Thank you, Kate. Appreciate it. Thank you.
How's the commute? Heading in the right direction, maybe?
Welcome. Hi, how are you? Hi. Good.
Open up.
Oh, that's great. Thank you very much, Chief. Yeah, thank you.
I just want you to know. I just want you to know.
Wasn't feeling well lately. Exception. And Mo was questioning exception. Dropping like flies.
Thank you very much. I'm sorry, this is a small room. Appreciate your coming and make yourself kind of wedged in. I appreciate it. And we're blessed with, my goodness, we have our Dover professionals here as well. It's great. Gino, I'm sorry, there is a seat up here. Would you like to come up?
There's room for a couple of more chairs too.
Right, right. Thanks. Excellent. Terrific. Moving on, I know, welcome. Mr. Orsi, I'm Candace McCann. John Jeffries, Robin Hunter, welcome. When we had our prior meeting on the 28th of September, unfortunately, we did not have you present. So we're glad to do this again, and I will turn the floor over to you.
Paul Orsi, 3 Clover Circle. I did want to note you're the designated speaker. No one ever wants to sit next to you, so thank you to all my fellow neighbors. So if I could just maybe talk for a minute and then ask some questions and get a dialogue going. A couple of things that I want to make clear that we're not asking for. We're not asking for road acceptance. We're not here to talk about accepting the road as a public road. We're not here asking for any maintenance of the road. The sole request that the Meadows has made is for snow plowing of the road. And I think the best example I can give of that is the storm we had last week. I took a walk towards the end of the storm. We probably had 13 inches of snow, and obviously when you're privately plowed roads get done last week, it probably would have been impassable to an ambulance to get down that street. But I got to the end of the street, I made it to Springdale plowed, Center Street plowed, all the roads around us. It took a short little walk, everyone was plowed. But concern number one is really a safety issue of an emergency down our condominium, and can vehicles get down there? I have some experience. I was a former selectman myself in a neighboring town, so I've got some experience with this. I also know that Mashpee, which is a town I'm also familiar with, had an emergency on one of their private roads. And as a result of that, made a decision that it was going to plow private roads as long as they met certain conditions. So that's really what we're here for, is to try to discuss snow plowing and whether the selectmen would consider plowing the road. This has been kind of and I've only been in town for 2 years. It's been about a 7 or 8 year odyssey from snow plowing. It kind of veered over towards road acceptance and letters from town council, and somehow it's kind of bounced around lots of different tracks with engineering studies for the roadway and that. But we're here to really discuss snow plowing. We put a memo together that talked about some issues related to snow plowing, some of the concerns we raised in response to town council's letter. And Dave and I spoke in December, I think it was. And we had a little bit of discussion about it that didn't really go very far. And I guess...
Got your free coffee though.
You got me a great free coffee. Yes. And I greatly appreciate that.
Appreciate that.
We did submit a memo on it, and we're hearing that the response from the selectmen is negative to our request. If it is, we'd like to sort of just hear what the reasons are why it's a no, and if we can have a little back and forth about why the no is a no, if we can sort of present some more information on those points. So we've made a request for snow plowing. I understand from Dave it's been denied. Could we have a little discussion about the reasons why?
If I may, Madam Chair.
Yes, please.
That's part of our misunderstanding. I never said that the selectmen had denied the request. They have not acted on the request. Subsequently, you asked if you could come to the selectmen and make the request, and that's what we're here for tonight. So I apologize for any misunderstanding. They have not acted on that.
Thank you, Mr. Ramsey. The other thing I wanted to say, and I'll kick this immediately back, we're blessed to have all of our professionals in town here present tonight, and Chief Hughes is here, and I remember your stating, in the event of an emergency, that private way would be plowed because it would be your intention and your business to be sure the ambulance, the fire truck, whatever it was, had access into the meadows. Do I recall that correctly?
Absolutely, yes.
And we've done that before.
Yep, on driveways, whatever it takes.
So in the event of the last storm, as Mr. Orsi is saying, when he walked out and clomped through the snow and found Springdale had been plowed, had there been a call, you wearing many hats in town, you would have been first to know an emergency call. You would have made sure that that was plowed to enable the vehicles to get wherever they needed to be in the meadows, correct?
On the most part, yes.
Right.
And I guess if I may, as Clem, is there a time frame where you think it would be plowed? I really don't want to get into minutia, but you'd have to get a plow from wherever it is in town over, and it would have to take however long it would take to plow the road for the emergency vehicle to get down there. I'm just pointing out it's been an issue. It's been an issue. I did a lot of research into other towns that was boring, but other towns have looked at the issue and said, we're better off just plowing these private roads so that there isn't an issue of not being able to get down there. I'm not saying it can't be plowed, I'm saying it could potentially be an issue.
Well, and also, if I remember, and I'm not trying to be argumentative at all, but the Meadows is 2 blocks from the emergency vehicles. Think about the people who are 7 miles in any direction. I would imagine that they would be quicker to the Meadows, even considering the plowing in front of the emergency vehicle, than getting to the corners of town. So I think, I believe, if you feel comfortable, Chief, that you would be able to get an emergency vehicle down in a critical time, then indeed that's already been addressed. We stated that on the 28th of September. Yes?
Again, not to be argumentative, but if it's a plowing and assaulting situation, those vehicles that typically rest near the meadows could be anywhere in town. And just to re-emphasize what Bob said about other towns, my experience in my life, as I worked where we had to call emergency vehicles frequently, in all kinds of weather, very rarely in snow. And they have a time frame. It can be 2 minutes, it can be 4 minutes, it can be 6 minutes. If we then have to wait for a plow or someone to come, I'm worried 4 to 10 minutes can be a very serious amount of time.
I hear you. I understand. Yes, please. Right.
Thank you, and then it's a situation I'm sure you would be concerned with as a citizen. And Chief, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think we've been through this in the past, and I'm pretty sure about this because I'm probably, with the exception of Bob, the only one that lives closer to the town garage and to the emergency vehicles. But in the event of a storm, an active storm where there's sanding and salting and plowing, there is always a vehicle in the yard, in the garage, in the town garage area. That vehicle maintains, it's an active, there's a driver in the vehicle at all times. If there was an emergency, there would be a vehicle that would be able to plow, quite possibly plow and sand if the case needed to be, faster than an emergency vehicle could respond to the neighborhood. So your neighborhood is less than 100 yards away from where there would be a vehicle sanding, plowing at all times. So of any place in town, you would be, or quite frankly, either you or where I live or where Chief lives or anybody in a geographical area that would be considered the village would be at an area more in a beneficial circumstance, better than anyone else in town to be able to respond.
Someone who's got a plowed road.
I'm sorry?
Other than someone who has a plowed road.
Actually, I would say even better. That your situation would be even better because somebody who has a plowed road has to wait for the rotation of a vehicle to go from one part of their rotation to the other.
No, I'm talking about if an ambulance would get down the road, it's plowed. as opposed to a road that's not plowed. And again, we could probably spend an hour going over this, and there really is no set standard here for it. It's one of our concerns. You know, we also know of other private roads in town that are plowed, and we're not plowed. So there's a few points that we want to go through on that. I'm not saying you don't have a point, I'm not saying we don't have a point either. It's certainly open for discussion on both sides. It's one of the concerns that we have, and I wouldn't want to be arguing after the fact about it, about what a response time might or might not have been. It's one of the concerns that we have. So.
It's a legitimate concern, and it's a concern that's shared not only by the citizens, but also by the faculty of the schools. So you have schools that are a bit remote from where the town, the plows and the emergency vehicles are. So one of the first thing that the chief does on a regular basis is, if there's a need like there was yesterday in the morning at 4:05, the first, and we can talk how I know that. There's, as I said, there's nobody who lives closer than I do. So at 4:05, the first sanding vehicle left the yard. It just so happens that the chief got a call from the chief or from the dispatch with regards to the surface of the road. So at 4:05 a.m., the first sanding vehicle leaves the yard. So that sanding vehicle, the first thing that they have to do is go to the high school, because that's priority one of where teachers and the associations and all the people who service the school will be. So just in terms of logistics, everything that you can imagine has been thought through by the chief with regards to emergency and emergency vehicles and emergency personnel. So safety is the number one concern for us and for the chief.
I'm not disputing that one bit. I would point out other towns have come to different conclusions on that. That's,
Yeah.
I'm not disputing what you're saying. If our road were plowed, we wouldn't even have to have the concern about it. So we're asking the selectmen to consider whether or not they'd accept plowing the road, which is not a lengthy road. But Dave, it's open for discussion. Should we just go through a couple of points, or can I answer some questions, or would you like me to speak a little bit on a couple of the issues?
Well, it might be appropriate now for Nina to explain the legal requirements for the selectmen to make a determination of whether they'll authorize plowing, because they don't have unfettered discretion.
Right, so Nina Pickering Cook from Town Council's office. I have been working with Dave. I know he's been working with you all for years now on this subject, and as you mentioned, you've seen some of my writing, it sounds like, on this. It is not as simple as the selectmen just deciding to plow this private way and instructing the Department of Public Works to do so, right? There's mechanisms in place in state law which permit a town to decide whether or not to plow a private way and take responsibility for its maintenance. That process is laid out in that first memo that I wrote, I think, almost 2 years ago now.
And we have copies if anybody's interested, but they were previously distributed several times.
So that process starts with a declaration by the selectmen that they intend to declare the way, a private way open for public use. That declaration requires factual finding by the selectmen. They would go through that process and then once that fact-finding process is done, that declaration is made, then they can make the instruction to have it plowed and included as public, as if it's a public way for maintenance purposes. The other avenue is to lay out the road as a public way. That involves town meeting in a longer process, which is also laid out in that memo. So that's the statutory process that would have to go through in order to get your roads plowed. On top of that is the additional hurdle, I guess I would call it, that you all have in your comprehensive permit and your master deed. In those documents, when the comprehensive permit was granted for your condominium development, they determined that and declared in that master deed that the town shall have no responsibility for road maintenance, including plowing. The comprehensive permit, one of its conditions is that the town has approved those operative documents, the declaration of trust and the master deed. That was done. My understanding is your master deed has since been amended to remove that absolute bar from town maintenance obligations. However, I don't think that amendment has been approved by the town, and meaning that your comprehensive permit does not carry with it that change. So I think where I am coming out on this as far as a logical process for you all to go through is that it makes sense to make sure that the comprehensive permit can be amended to reflect your desire to take away that prohibition on town maintenance. And then once that is done, there would not be, and that process would be through the ZBA and town council's office. And once that is done, then the processes laid out in the 2015 memo, either acceptance or the declaration by the Board of Selectmen, would be the avenues for you all to go through.
Can I address some of those points? Because
Please.
I do disagree with some of them, and some I agree with.
Sure.
But also, and Betsy can maybe speak to this, I moved into town in the middle of this, so I don't have some of the history on my side. The road did get laid out, and again, the original request was for snow plowing. I think somehow it moved in the direction of accepting it as a public way, which was not what the original request was, but kind of was done in response to the memo. So the road is laid out. If it wanted to be accepted as a statutory private way, I think that would be certainly open. But as to, you're right, the selectmen can make a factual determination as to whether a private way is open for public use or not. And I'm stuck on the point about the comprehensive permit and the master deed. I think maybe it turns on what the definition of maintenance is, but you know, the comprehensive permit, I've seen comprehensive permits that specifically address snow plowing and specifically address maintenance in great detail.
Sure.
And I attached a couple to the memo. And I just want to go through the mechanics here. The only thing that I can find, and Dave and I talked about it when we last met, is paragraph 12 that says, the applicant shall execute a cause to be executed amongst the documents as a master deed. Prior to execution, these documents shall be approved by town council. The requirements shall be incorporated by reference. I have copies of those if need be. The original master deed, again, before my time, I don't want to speak to the amendment because I wasn't here when that was done, but let's go to the original language.
Sure.
Which, the original language, it doesn't say the town of Dover can't do snow plowing. It says, and I've got copies and I highlighted them so we can go through that. It says all private ways, utilities, and services located within or outside the site or said easements in any private drainage facilities feeding into the drainage structures within the site or easements shall not be the responsibility of the town of Dover, but shall be maintained by the condominium trust. And it does not say that snow plowing will not be undertaken by the town of Dover. It does say no de-icing salts or compounds shall be used on site. There is a previous section that is not that sentence that says trustees of the condominium trust and not the declarant shall be obligated to maintain the common drive, including related easements. And there it says, including removal of snow and ice therefrom, and utilities therein, thereon, and thereunder. So the maintenance obligation is addressed in that first sentence as between the trustees and the declarant. It is not in that second sentence, and it doesn't say anything about the town not being able to address snow plowing in the condominium.
Would it be, excuse me, Bob, would it be appropriate for me to distribute copies of the memo you wrote comparing the two? Because it references
And
further.
I do draw a distinction. I think pretty much all towns do agreeing to maintain a private way and agreeing to plow a private way. I've lived in Providence in the summers almost my whole life. There's a complete system of private ways. It has always been plowed by the town. It has not been maintained by the town. And I don't think that anyone says that snow plowing is in fact maintenance of the road. If you look at the snow plow statute, which I guess we can hand out, it says the town may, city or town which accepts this section in the manner provided in section 16 may appropriate money for the removal of snow and ice from such private ways within its limits and open to the public use as may be designated, provided that for the purposes of section 25 of chapter 84, which is a tort claims provision, removal of snow and ice shall not constitute a repair. So the statute mentions the word repair there in the context that it's not a repair. And I can hand out copies if you want. But I don't think,
But Bob, does it say, I'm sorry, does it refer to it as not being maintenance?
it shall not constitute repair of a way.
But
I have extras if anybody would like to comment. So I did,
Thank you.
and I attached to the memo that I prepared back in November, a lot of copies of policies that towns have adopted that have studied the issue and have said what are the indicia that they're going to look at as to whether the private way will be plowed. Not that it's maintained, that it will be plowed. And as I said, I pay out of my own pocket to maintain my roads in Pompanesett, but I've ridden around with the truck. Unfortunately, I was the president of that community for 4 years. I've ridden around with the DPW to see what barriers to the road have to be removed, but tree limbs have to be cut back in order to have the roads plowed. There would be no maintenance of the road. I don't know if you guys maintain any of the private roads that you do plow.
I don't think it's helpful
Yeah.
to differentiate between plowing and maintenance at this point. I mean, looking at the comprehensive permit, I understand, I have the same language right here in front of me, where the sentence regarding the town shall not be responsible for maintaining it, it shall only be the responsibility of the condominium trust. The very next sentence, as you mentioned, it talks about no de-icing salts or compounds shall be used. I mean, it clearly envisions that maintenance, including snow and ice removal. So I'm just,
Excuse me, is that something that's not allowed in the community as opposed to something that wouldn't be provided as a service?
And I think
Because there are a lot of environmental...
no, I completely agree with you, but I'm saying where it's talking about that snow and ice component in the very next sentence, that indicates that where it's talking about maintaining the ways, that maintenance includes snow and ice removal. So that's how we're reading it. That is certainly how I'm reading it. The language that you pointed out from the comprehensive permit does specifically incorporate that obligation by reference.
I mentioned that it did.
I'm not trying to argue with you on that.
But if
So all I'm saying is I have laid out what I believe the steps that the town needs to go through in order to do this properly. I make no judgment on whether this is an appropriate step to take. I am purely just pointing out the process. The other thing I would say is it is never incredibly persuasive for me as town council to a number of different communities to hear how or why or what other communities do. So I know much of your argument is, and that is a legal judgment as opposed to a political judgment. But I certainly understand that some other towns plow their private ways. I have no understanding of whether they've gone through the statutory process to do that. That is not my concern. My concern is that the Dover Selectmen go through the right process to do so.
Correct.
if I can address those 2 points. And I hate having to fall back on something that's implied in the language rather than being stated in the language, because it could very clearly be stated in the language. And I included in my memo a special permit from Topsfield, and I'm familiar with, has an entire paragraph. First thing, the town has no obligation to plow snow from the ways in the site. And it goes on and on and on about regulations and requirements that they snow on.
Mr. Orsi, excuse me just one second. We are very grateful to have town council present here. And I believe, unless I'm misunderstanding, you just made the statement that you're not really interested in hearing the language or the determination of other towns.
I don't find it persuasive as far as interpreting what our legal documents say.
Exactly. I think what we need to do, since you're all here to talk about next steps, is indeed to talk about next steps.
There is one other point that I'd like to address.
Okay.
Because in my early years, I was a Palmer Dodge and I was town council for Dover, going back 30-odd years. And I've worked with many towns, either as a selectman or otherwise, and I know that there are other towns that do look at what other communities are doing. So I don't want to just close the door and say you have to be blind to what other communities are trying to do. The
Mr. Orson.
selectmen get to make their own factual determination as to whether it's standard.
We have a process, and that's what we're delighted to have our counsel here to speak to the process, so that indeed we can help you understand what you would perhaps choose or not choose to do next steps. That's what we're trying to do.
Understood.
I have a question, and it may work for or against the argument we're putting forward, but it is within our town. There is another condominium community that is similar in some interesting ways, similar to ours. It's not called Tisdale, but it's Tisdale Road. It's the Commons or something. I don't know the name of it. But it is within Dover, and the town does plow them. One of the things that makes it interesting and similar to us is, evidently, there is a road. Tisdale was a road, and it was just extended across the main Route 109 when the condominium was built. Whereas we have Hawthorne Lane Extension, which was extended when our condo was built. I understand that they're being plowed, and I'm wondering what was different.
Is this Tisdale Drive, ma'am?
Yeah, I guess that is.
Tisdale Drive was accepted by the town.
It went through road acceptance?
It went through street acceptance,
Okay, so
which is one of the two avenues that are available to you to attempt to do. This group did attempt to do that a couple of years ago, and then withdrew based on opinions from the planning board and the zoning board of appeals. So that's the distinction with Tisdale. If the selectmen...
And they were, their road was accepted based upon?
Recommendations from the planning board, and then a vote by the Board of Selectmen, and then went before the town meeting.
So what I'm hearing you say, once again, I feel like I've gone in this circle before. We should consider road acceptance, but then we've been told not to consider road acceptance. So
What the advice from our offices have been procedural. To Betsy first and then to Bob, that, as the council has said, there are two paths to get legal authorization to plow snow. One is through the street acceptance process, which was attempted once before by this group. The other is by the Chapter 40 authorization by the selectmen after determining that the way is used publicly. Those are the two avenues. Tisdale went the one successfully, and that's why it's plowed.
I'm not sure if there's another avenue. Can I ask town council a question? Because it might help. And I'm not incredibly familiar with private ways, but in your memo you talked about one of the ways was to have the road laid out as a statutory private way. This was laid out, and 2 years ago when this was done, it was laid out to become a public way. And honestly, I wasn't around at the time, I'm not sure why that happened. Could you just explain a little bit on statutory private way as opposed to a public way?
So laying out of a statutory private way is not a third option. What it would do is it would buttress your argument under being a private way open to public use. So by definition, a statutory private way is open to public use. So if you were able to go through the process for laying it out as a statutory private way, then again, that would be an indicia of the factual qualifications for proceeding under Chapter 40.
Because I would agree with you that, and again, coming a little bit late to the game, that given the restrictions in the comprehensive permit on maintenance, having the town take on the road as a public way means the town takes on maintenance obligations, which I agree is clearly prohibited by the comprehensive permit. So if you're saying that there's a route to lay it out as a statutory private way, where maintenance responsibility remains with the association, the snow plowing being undertaken by the selectmen, that's a different fish.
So that is certainly an option. It's the same process as laying it out as a public way, but without that maintenance obligation.
Right, because, when, again, we received the ZBA's memo, I think at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, the day of the warrant hearing, we really didn't have time to process it and try to understand and to meet with the ZBA and talk about it, so we withdrew the warrant article, but the memo from the Board of Appeals clearly addressed the maintenance issues, which, sure, those are the difficult
So
issues.
that's a perfect platform for you to go to the ZBA and say, look, we're not asking for maintenance. We would like to lay this out as a statutory private way. We would like your support and recommendation for that. While you're at it, I would get the amendment to the comprehensive permit or the blessing of the amendment to master deed, just to button up all the legal avenues there.
Maybe I could ask this today, would the ZBA be willing to meet with the community? Because I know we asked after the hearing 2 years ago, we were told no.
I believe that request was to meet with them, not for a formal action, and I believe that was their reason for not agreeing. As Nina said, if you're looking to have them approve the revised master deed, the original which they had previously approved, I think they would, in fact, I mean, I can't speak for them, but I think they'd have an obligation to meet with you.
That we did not have a pending matter, or we were trying to meet to understand what was in the memo.
Correct.
And the board meeting. So
I think the ZBAs tend to get a little concerned as far as giving advisory opinions to folks, so that was probably where they were coming from there, but I don't.
We were looking for an advisory opinion. So, I mean, rather than eat up a lot of people's time tonight, so is this, the selectmen in effect asking us if we want to continue with this process to go back to the zoning board of appeals?
We have not actually spoken about it, but I mean, this is a perfect opportunity. Personally, I would be in favor of your going back to ZBA, depending on what their decision is around amending the comprehensive deed. It would indeed then come back to us. We would do due diligence and check with our police chief, we would check with our chief of roads and determine indeed how much public use is being indicated on the private way, but we would take all of that into consideration at that particular time. But my position would be, and I will then turn to my colleagues, my position would be that you go first to ZBA, and if they are willing to make the amendment to the comprehensive deed, it then does further your position as far as coming back to us, and we would go through the rest of our process. I don't know how that sounds to you, Mrs. Hunter?
I would agree. I believe that is the next step. I agree with you. I sat in this room when we did get the opinion from the ZBA at 3:30, and it was very difficult for all of us because none of us had seen it before. So I think what we should do is go through the process and begin that process early on. So I would suggest that you go through the ZBA first.
Bob, I agree with both Candace and Robin. I think that in the absence of, our directive is to follow procedure, protocols, and we're going to follow the advice of counsel, and we're going to follow the advice of counsel upon the factual process. When it comes time to the finding of facts, as the Madam Chair has pointed out to you, if it goes to the ZBA, comes back to us, our process is going to be the finding of facts, and the finding of facts are going to have the conversations with the gentleman who's right behind you. Where I feel very confident, and I've mentioned this to you earlier, I live 500 yards from your house. Chief lives 800 yards from your house. So from a factual component as far as safety and the process and the oversight of your private way or anybody else's private way, I would rely heavily upon the comments from the chief and of our safety officers.
Understood, but I just hope the board understands the frustration of this community, because this message delivered in September, October of 2015 would probably, I moved in March of 2016, would probably have led Betsy to precisely that, a meeting with the ZBA to discuss possible, whether or not we feel amendment is necessary, the possible amendment of the comprehensive permit, and this might be done by now. But we understand the position the board is taking, that the instructions are clear, and we'll have our own discussion and talk about going before the ZBA.
Excellent.
So you do plow the roads already, and how do you distinguish between what you plow and what you don't plow?
I'm sorry, let's make that, I can make Betsy's question a little clearer for you. There's Hawthorne Lane and then there's Hawthorne Lane Extension. And Hawthorne Lane Extension is plowed. In fact, it has a sign that says private way on it because of the parking issue, but it's plowed. Hawthorne Lane has no signs on it, but it's not plowed. And I'm going to answer for the board just quickly, I guess. I'm going to assume Hoffman Lane Extension was there before the Meadows was there.
Yes.
And it is,
Grandfathered.
I don't want to use the
It's
term
not an
grandfather.
accepted road, it's not listed. No. It is it is owned by the
I
Meadows.
don't know that technically it's a road that meets your requirements, that haven't been a statutory road or a road that's open to the public. We have no intentions to do anything with that road. It's just, it's a spot in the condominium where for part of the road is plowed and part of the road isn't plowed.
And for the board, this
Yes.
is the extension between Springdale and Dedham.
Right.
And in speaking with the superintendent of streets, who's been our superintendent for 25 years, he's always plowed it. It has always been open to the public, but for that one 24-hour period that Lutazi would put his trucks there to prevent people from passing, both for traveling, driving vehicles, and for parking. So that was clear. That's the distinction. It's been there forever, and it's always been available for the public use.
But I don't know that it meets the requirements that town council put out for acceptance for plowing. I don't think there's many factual determinations made with respect to that. With respect, I don't think that we're here to talk about that, and I don't think it's productive at this point. That's it. I understand the concern, and it's before the board, but it's not going to get anywhere tonight.
Mr. Orsi, I think, and I hope I'm speaking for the spirit of the board, we urge you to go through the process and see where it takes you. Because if it brings it all back and we're able to help, we will do what we can, but we must stick to the process, and that is what we are. We're so grateful to have you here. Nina, thank you, and also we will probably be asking our town council to return when you return to us, because this will be a process that we all want to go through very correctly. Okay?
If I may just ask one clarifying point, since the warrant closes at 1 o'clock tomorrow, Bob, you started your remarks by saying you're not interested in acceptance, but we had provided to Joanne a petition. Do you intend to file that timely before?
I collected that so that my co-homeowners at the Meadows would have that option open. We didn't want to close any doors. We wanted to fully understand what our options were and what was appropriate. I'm not an attorney, and small print and a lot of this, I'm trying to hang on to a lot of this. But what I heard tonight was that road acceptance is not an option for us, so it doesn't really make sense to go before town meeting, but that's something we will discuss. Am I right?
No, I wouldn't say that. I would say there's a couple of different options. It sounded to me like Bob did want to explore with the ZBA whether they would support a statutory private way, which would go through the same acceptance process. Again, that will depend on what the ZBA thinks about that, which is different than a public way.
Well, we'll discuss it. We have till, what did you say, 1 o'clock?
1 o'clock.
So
But I would say in fairness to the community, that the direction they were told to go in 2.5 years ago was the direction they went in, and it wasn't made clear to them, inadvertently or not, that the strong feeling was go to the ZBA first, then come back before the town and have a discussion. It was lay out the road, whether it was, maybe it wasn't, the memo itself didn't really talk about going to the ZBA for a discussion about this, but that's the direction we need to go, and that's the direction to follow.
But just to be clear, the memo does talk about amending the comprehensive permit and the master deed and going back to the ZBA.
I can't speak to it because I wasn't here, but somehow the message that was received, Betsy, you'd be the one to speak to this, was to have the road laid out. So we're going to follow that.
Well, you know what, it gets us nowhere. It is what it is. We have a plan to move forward, so let's do that.
Right.
Great, thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much.
I'm assuming you don't need me to hang around for anything?
You can if
This
you
is what
like,
I
it could
do
be
for
really
you. No.
entertaining.
Enjoy that beer you got
Thank you
coming.
very much. Me too.
Yeah,
Thank you for
one for
coming.
each.
Have a
Nina,
great.
thank you so much.
Oh, absolutely.
Really appreciate your coming. It's very helpful.
Could not resist saying that this was all laid
I
out.
wrote on this one, you're very,
We're soulmates. We're soulmates.
I let it go once
It's,
and then I couldn't let it go.
I think it's the same thing. It just,
Oh, of course, Gabe, it's good to see you. Good to see you.
Bob, thank you.
Nice to meet you.
Great to meet you.
Good to see you, Bob. Please do.
Right.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Bob. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Keeping my distance from you. Oh, my career has gone down. That's right.
Right.
And you might be not.
Everybody in my office is sick.
Honestly, I feel great. So,
Thank you, Walter.
Nina.
hi, Barry.
Don't spend much time. Thanks, good night.
Thank you very much. Thank you all, everyone at home, for your patience. We'll move on with, yes, that's right.
You go to the ratings.
Would you? Yeah, thank you very much.
Nina.
That's great. The next agenda, and I apologize, we're running a little late, but the next agenda item is to approve the 2017 Selectmen's Town Report. This is the entry into the annual town report, and I believe we've all had an opportunity to review it and comment on it. And unless anyone has any last-minute changes, I would take a motion.
Well, I will make a motion to accept the town report as written and included in our package this evening.
Thank you.
Seconded.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye, thank you. I would like to move on to the warrant articles for everyone to know, and we've heard mention of this tonight, that the warrant does close at 1 o'clock tomorrow, Friday afternoon, the 26th of January, and we are now looking at a more complete list. We have 2 additions from our last 2 weeks ago, our meeting. The 2 additions on the warrant are that we have a second article about replacing the boilers at Carroll Community Center. That is the one. And the second one is the warrant article that the water study just alluded to, looking for the monies for a hydrology report. That's the second warrant article that has now been added to the list. We may have some last-minute additions tomorrow, but at the same time, we're looking at a fairly complete list, I imagine, at this point.
Totaling 28.
That's great. Do you have any questions or anything to point out? Okay?
No.
Nope, good, excellent. We have next item is to approve the revised fiscal year 19 Selectmen's Budget number 911, the Norfolk County retirement expenses. My understanding is that that was an addition that we were able to make into the budget. Is that right, Mr. Ramsey?
We get the assessment generally later in the budget process. It's been received, so that's why you're voting on it tonight.
Excellent.
So, Madam Chair, I move that we accept the amended budget,
Perfect.
911.
Do I hear a
I'll
second?
second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye, thank you. In terms of other business, are we at the license part? We have a prior notice, excuse me. Do we have 2 prior notices? Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Shulo. We have prior notice from building maintenance in the amount of $6,414. It is to replace damaged siding at the Protective Agencies building. The siding on the building was rotted, so this is an amount for that purchase, for that repair to be done. Any questions, Mrs. Canning? No? Okay. I would take a motion.
I move that we approve the $6,414 for the building maintenance.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
And secondly, again from building maintenance, in the amount of $4,627. This is to replace the main heating coil in the HVAC system. That heating coil developed an irreparable leak.
For the library.
For the library, thank you for that.
I move that we accept $4,627 for the building maintenance of the library heating and cooling system.
Thank you, Mr. Jeffries.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye, good. Now,
So just
Oh,
for
sorry.
clarification, so this is, the amount doesn't cover the deficit?
Right, this is the amount of the actual repairs that we're putting people on notice for that is extraordinary. It's not intended to cover the deficit in the subline.
okay, thank you. It's just the specific repair, the 4627. Right, thank you. That's a good question. I did see that. In parentheses, and I thought, there must be a good. Would you do us the honors,
Madam
sir?
Chair, I would love to do the honors of reading the location, the events, and the dates. March 24th, somebody planning in advance, biennial auction for fundraiser at the Chickering Elementary School by the Chickering PTO on March 24th. And on May 3rd, charity event at Elm Bank. Just 2 items for our approval. So I move that we accept these requests for this one-day liquor licenses, and we didn't even get invited to the fundraiser at Chickering.
If you bring your checkbook, I'm sure you'll have
Do I hear a second?
it. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. We'll sign afterwards, Mrs. DeShulo, is that right? Very good, thank you. And we are at the point of meeting minutes. We have had the opportunity to review the open session meeting minutes from January 11th. Did you both have any questions or any concerns?
Mrs. DeShillo did a fabulous job
She
once
does.
again, Madam Chair. I thought it was-
Absolutely.
Seeing none. I would move that we accept the minutes of January 11th, 2018.
Thank you.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Excellent. And do we have any citizens' comments?
You're the citizen.
Yes, we do.
Yeah, Grant Stephen, Rochelle Road. I just wanted to ask on behalf of the Friends of the Dover Greenway for a informal update on negotiations with MBTA, at least just to get the status on that.
So we have not heard from the MBTA, but we do have a meeting set up with the Friends. Right? And our consultants. I think it's February 4th.
First,
1st.
at 4.
And so-
February 1st at 4.
And so with MBTA, it's,
Well, we'll hope, we maybe by the 1st, we will ping them again and ask, right?
Right.
Grant, are you available for that? Is that something that's in your book?
I'll be part of the conversation.
Great. Great. Thank you. Thank you for the follow-up. Thank you for the work. I know there's been, well, it's the beginning.
Well, hopefully it's the beginning of a lot of work.
The end of the beginning, but
Right.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any other comments, Mrs. Canny? Right? I have one announcement that I would like to make, and that is that once a year, one of us is up for re-election. And I have had the most wonderful time, 3 years on the Board of Selectmen. I want to thank specifically Mr. Ramsey and Mrs. DeShillo and Mrs. Pugach for making it possible for me to do my work. And I also want to thank the professionals in town that do the most remarkable job, and all of the volunteers on the boards and the commissions who tirelessly work at trying to create an agenda in town that works for the townspeople and how can we best serve. And so with that, I would like to say I have loved it, and I am hereby declaring I would like to run for a second term as selectman. So thank you all very much. So anything else? No?
No?
No. We have to adjourn for executive.
Yes, we do. We are going to executive session at this particular point because we have collective bargaining issues to be discussed. We will not be returning to open session. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.